You want to do
All
our
right.
welcome?
Well, welcome everybody to Wind Down Wednesday. We'll start with our usual toast. Christine will toast, air toast, virtual toast.
Nice.
Ching.
We
Happy
can't
Wind
ching,
Down
ching,
Wednesday,
ching.
everyone.
we can't hug or kiss in person, but we can.
We can toast.
Yeah.
Here's to good health, to happiness. So anyway, welcome everybody. We're so excited to have our guests. Marianne Keller, I've known about you for a long time because I hear the escapades of the family and the therapist and for a long time, but also how remarkable you are and have been, and you can tell a little bit more about yourself. And of course, Shay McAtee, we've known, I've
Go
called
way
her
back.
Shay Baby forever and ever. So for what, 500,000 years, Shay, or something, you know, about that. And Christine, it's our first time I get to meet you too, but I'm so happy to meet you. And I don't know,
Nice to meet
Zoe,
you too.
thanks. So I don't know, Zoe, if you want to say a little bit more, and then maybe you can.
Yeah, and then we'll
Yeah.
invite each of you to say a little bit about yourself. Well, I'm just so thrilled to have such close friends and acquaintances that we have so many warm feelings for. We really appreciate you taking this time with us tonight. And I think that we've shared that we have started these Wind Down Wednesday conversations as a way to connect during this very unusual time where we're all staying in isolation. And our friends from around the world have given us such positive feedback about the ways that they have appreciated the conversations and connecting. So I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. I have so many warm feelings towards all three of you, but let's start with you, Marianne. Why don't you let everyone know a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am a mom. I think that's how I met a number of folks whose faces appear here. So yeah, I've known Zoe and Shay for 22 years. My son Liam is 24, and he received a diagnosis of autism before he turned 2 years old, which at that time was, you know, pretty young to get a diagnosis like that. And the very first thing that we did was started occupational therapy, and we were lucky enough to have folks like Zoe and others who really were transformative. So in addition, my day job, aside from being a mom and a wife, is I'm a partner and chief strategy officer for an advisory and accounting firm. And I also spend a lot of my time with my passion, which is supporting organizations that help individuals with disabilities and their families to thrive, and particularly the transition to adulthood and ways that we can really optimize the quality of life for individuals who tend to be marginalized in society.
Thank you, Marianne.
Wonderful.
I just would like to say that Marianne and her husband Eddie have just been heroes of mine for all these 20-some years. They're such genuine, real people who have been so constructive, I think, in the way that they have embraced the challenges that have come their way and been so creative in the way that you have come up with solutions. So when we thought about talking about advocacy, you were definitely the first person who came to mind. I think you've just been so constructive in the way that you have been able to advocate for your family, for Liam, and for so many others. So thank you for all you've done.
Thanks for the pleasure of being with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So how about we'll go to Shay next. Shay, tell us.
Hi, everyone. I've been an OT in pediatrics for way lots of years. And when I first went to study with Dr. Ayers is when I met Zoe, and then also Suzanne. So it's been, I don't know, 35 years, or how old is Anthony? It's longer than Anthony.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's 33.
Longer than
So,
Well,
yeah, longer than Anthony.
Shay is
That's how we measure time.
Shay is Anthony's godmother. So.
That's why I knew I was around then. And that was an amazing experience to meet them, but also to work with Dr. Ayers. And then I stayed on working with lots of different aspects of evaluating sensory integration, and worked again with Zoe and Suzanne and many others that were wonderful. And then I also, over the years, was developing a photography practice. And finally, it all sort of came together for me, and the thing that I had really wanted to do all along, which was to create this book of where I photographed, I have in the book, there are 52 children and teens who are on the autism spectrum. There's a wide range, it's a spectrum. And I interviewed the parents and the child themselves, if possible, or siblings, where possible. And I didn't ask about autism, I asked, who is your child? So I wanted them to have the opportunity, and they could, it was wide open, they could say whatever they wanted to say about their child. And then I was very protective of the information as well, because when it got to the point of even getting close to what I was going to put in the book, that's when I sent out all of the interviews and said, okay, this is a whole bunch of what you said. I've edited some, but some of this might be in, is that okay? And then they had choices of what they wanted. And the same thing with the photographs. I sent them to them and gave them an idea of, I told them that I wanted them to see how I was presenting their child before they signed a consent. I also sent assents to the children. So any of the kids that could sign an assent, or to any of the kids that were over 18, I sent consents. So there was, I just thought of it as a team the whole time along. And so now the book is published. It took 12 years with all the work, other work I'm doing. And it's, yeah, The Spirit Within, Insights from the Autism Spectrum. And that's my heart right now.
Thanks, Shay. Shay, I think you just, you know, for those of us who've had the pleasure of working with you as a therapist and seeing what a masterful therapist you are, and then having the chance myself to see how you use those skills in photography, you know, all the photographs that you've taken of our own children, for the textbooks, for so many projects over the years. It's just been such a beautiful blending of your talents as a therapist and a photographer, and the book is really beautiful.
Thank you.
I don't want to dominate Suzanne, in case you want to jump in before we go to Christine. Or...
No, that's all right. I'm eager to get to know Christine a little bit more.
And Christine, we're so happy to have you with us. You've been such a great voice and so brave in sharing so much with us. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm an autistic self-advocate. I went to college and graduated from LMU with a bachelor's in psychology back in 2015. And as you all know, I wrote a book called Working the Double Shift, A Young Woman's Journey with Autism. I think I have, and speaking of which, I have a copy. Can you see it?
Good.
Happen to have a copy.
Yeah.
Great.
That's a beautiful picture of you on the cover.
Thank you.
Christine, you want to share a little bit about the title? When I met you, I think you were finishing the book and or it was around the time you were working on the book, and I thought it was such a clever title and so meaningful. You want to tell everyone a little bit about that, why you chose the title?
Because in my life, I feel like I'm working a double shift. Like I'm living in both the neurotypical and the autistic world. And you know how a lot of people take for granted, like, oh, I get to work and then socialize. And then they feel like that's like freedom to them, like to go parties and drinking at bars and making friends. But for me, that's like extra work for me. I have to work twice as hard because that doesn't come easy to me because I'm autistic.
Yeah.
It's like working and then right now with this pandemic, I'm working like triple shifts, quadruple shifts. You could go on and on.
So you mentioned that, so you're living in Washington State now, correct? And you
Yeah,
mentioned that you are, you're working in the schools, is that right?
yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about that? I didn't know that. I was really happy to hear and just thinking how lucky those students are to have your mentorship.
So I'm a para at the local school district, and I help kids with special needs, like a wider range. Like some of our students are nonverbal, and they use like an AAC.
And
And
have you been able to continue with the stay-at-home orders?
unfortunately, it's been very hard.
Mm.
And because I'm a para, I'm not really a teacher, so I don't get to have regular contact with them because that's not
Mhm.
it. The only thing we can probably do is write cards to them, but that's it. So it's not really a fun job right now.
That must be hard for you and for them.
Yeah, I can't imagine how hard it is for the families because it's really hard for us staff too.
Right.
I just I just want to say I've known Christina a really long time, and she and I have stayed friends throughout. And I've gotten to see her from the time she was in middle school or high school, all the way through the present, and the power of being such a strong self-advocate and being able to, as Zoe said, be so honest and open about your personal experiences is such a gift, because you not only um, speak up for yourself, but give voice to things that I think really illuminate the journey for a lot of individuals with disabilities. It was so exciting because before Christine moved to Washington State and had grown up in California, after graduation from Loyola Marymount, she was a paraprofessional here too in California. And I remember just thinking, wow, how lucky the students are to have a paraprofessional who has been in their shoes and who isn't just applying expertise and knowledge as Christine was, but also has personal experience to lay over that. And it's just kind of thrilling, Christine, that your students get to have that experience with you. So it's really cool.
And, especially since you mentioned that working with some of the students who might not have as much language, we always get so many questions in our webinars and in our courses about how to communicate, with individuals who have that difficulty. And since you mentioned that, I'm wondering if you have anything to share about that aspect of your work.
Yeah, that's kind of hard, but it's like you got to be careful, like not to baby talk to them because it's easy to see them like, oh, they have a capacity like a child because they can't talk, but they understand a lot more than what people think. And I think it's important to find alternative methods of communication, like an iPad with a speech app. And I had to actually learn that app too, so that was fun, like learning, so I could help them like find different icons. So it was just interesting perspective, like because they can't talk out of their mouth like we all can, and then making them like do independent, like doing stuff for them versus having them do it themselves, like giving them a sense of agency. And this is like a panel about self-advocacy, so that's what we try to do, especially because they're high school, they're going to be going out into the real world soon, so you kind of just don't want to treat them like babies anymore. So you could have like, so they could have like the future, like they could hold like some type of job, whether if it's like cleaning tables and stuff.
Well, talking
I
about
was
independence to the OTs, you are speaking right to our heart. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, yeah, I mean, when we decided that we would all get together and you were willing to come and join us along with Marianne, I mean, this idea of advocacy, but And I think OTs in general, because most of the viewers are going to be occupational therapists, feel like we advocate for others, but I love these terms that you're using, like sense of agency, and even the term advocacy. We had a little background chat about what does advocacy really mean, and then how do we move that into a sense of agency, which is the self-advocacy, especially when you have so many nonverbal or individuals or people who have more trouble expressing themselves. So I think that's a question. What does advocacy mean? First of all.
Yeah, so Christine, I have a thought about that as an advocate, but I'm curious, as a self-advocate, what does that mean to you as a self-advocate, to advocate for yourself?
It means like to know what your needs are and just make sure you don't take no for an answer. And, you know, because I have sometimes I have this fear like people won't take my needs seriously, because I'm just saying this stuff is not easy. Advocacy is not easy, because there's going to be people who are going to doubt. They're going to say, well, you don't look autistic. And that's the other end of the spectrum, where there's people you can't tell they're autistic because they look typical.
Yeah.
And they talk typical too. So people like saying, well, you don't need support, you don't need these accommodations, and you just got to be very persistent. You just got to know what those needs are, and you understanding challenges before they occur, like anticipating, well, this is going to be happening, and I'm going to need this type of help. So it's kind of like you got to know what those obstacles are and how to find a way around them. So overcoming barriers.
I really like that description. Go ahead.
What if it's going to college or living independently or working?
Mm-hmm.
So, Christine, are you then, do you need to then develop your own accommodations, or do you have support that can help as well? Just like everyone has friends that they can, for support. You have people in your life that can support you with helping you come up with the accommodations, or are those things that you are on your own?
Well, some of it was on my own. Like in the college, like they had no idea how to support an autistic student like me, because there weren't too many autistic people going to college. So the Disability Center had no clue how to support these students.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to navigate this on my own, and it was hard because all they had to offer was like extended time on tests, a note taker. Well, then it may be, and I'm not slamming those accommodations, because it is helpful for some of the spectrum, but you have to be the one to go advocate and get it, like, and talk to the professors. And that's really hard for a lot of our people, because you don't know if the professor is going to believe you, because a lot of these people, they don't get training on autism in college and what it looks like. And even like to this day, when we moved from California to Washington, that's the latest like advocacy hurdle that me and my family had to go through. And luckily I had my mom, because in Washington, they're more strict. Like they look more at the IQ than California does.
Mm.
Most states are like that. Not all states, just some states in Washington, like they want you to have like an IQ below a certain number, and it's not like reflective of current research that IQ and autism don't correlate. Like having a low IQ doesn't mean, having a high IQ doesn't mean that you have the tools to know how to navigate day-to-day life, because it's one thing to know how to do algebra problems or know how to write an essay, but if you can't cook for yourself, or you can't socialize with people, that's not gonna help you in life. And you need, and that's like and that's what I don't think some of these states get when they have these strict criteria, especially for autism. And I think it's because they want to save money, because there's not too many home and community-based service waivers. That's like a big problem in adult services.
It
It's not
sounds
like,
like there's a lot of education that has to happen
yeah.
for not, for everyone out there
But what was
that
shocked
might
is
be.
that what was shocking is I actually got into that waiver, and I was thinking, oh my God, that wasn't that much of a battle, because I had, the big differences.
Hmm.
Why?
Hmm.
Because I had a diagnosis of classic autism versus the Asperger syndrome when I
So,
was little. So they look at that paperwork.
Christine,
Yeah.
I'm curious when you say that there were some general or, common accommodations, but then you had to come up with some of your own. I have a feeling that our participants would be really curious about what were some of those. What are some of the things that people aren't thinking about that you had to alert them to?
Well, and some of that was informal. Like, I had a family friend at the university, and he happened to be working there, and he served as a mentor because we knew him from like a church connection. So he kind of helped me. And so you could use like informal connections, but you could also find and then I hired like someone, like a mentor or companion, to do community outings with me. But if you can't get like a one-on-one aid for your child, let's say like your child needs like someone to like accommodate them to classes, or to negotiate the disability center at college, which could be very bureaucratic and red tape. So you could probably try to hire like an aide, but I'm like either through the state or private pay. But unfortunately it becomes expensive, because it's not like the school they'll just provide it for you.
Mhm.
But you could also do that if you're willing to do that, because I kind of wished I had that when I was first going into the community college, because I felt so lost. And because of that, I felt so lost. I felt depressed and anxious those first 2 years of college.
And can I ask you, when you felt lost, was it physically lost, like you couldn't find your classes, or just navigating the systems?
Navigating the systems and emotionally lost.
I see. I see. That's helpful to know. Yeah. So then when you have someone with you that can sort of decode those systems, that was helpful to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us need those systems. I've been asking a lot of help. I think Marco is our support for decoding this technology system right now. But, I think a lot of us need these help as we navigate it to a greater or lesser degree.
But
And
yeah.
one of the other things that I really liked about what you said, just the difference between Washington State and California, because we have listeners from all over the world, there are vast differences between what's available to people and the gate, who's the gatekeeper and what are those gates to service, and the amount and type of service, and the understanding that's vastly different from place to place. So I think your point is so well taken, that there will be differences.
And it's interesting that you're talking about bringing in maybe non-traditional people and supports, as a way of helping individuals navigate. I think you've done that too, Marianne. You've been creative about putting together teams, and I don't know if you have anything to add to that, for people to, our community to think about how they might assist or facilitate some of those kinds of relationships or strategies.
Yeah, it's interesting because, Christine and her family have been family friends for a really long time. My son Liam really admires Christine, and Liam's a really, friendly person, and very social in his own way. Really loves being surrounded by his tribe of people. But I will say that he is particularly partial. He's a little bit discriminatory in the sense that he prefers people who are autistic. So a lot of times he'll meet people and he'll say to me, "Are they autistic?" with great hope in his voice. And I have to say, "I'm sorry, they're not autistic." Typical. He's like, "All right, I'll be friends with them anyway." But having a friend like Christine is really joyful because there's a common vernacular, and I think words really matter. High functioning, low functioning, or classically autistic versus Asperger's and things. And we tend to refer to it as high support or low support, because as Christine pointed out, the correlation of IQ, someone could have a very high IQ but also be a high support individual for functioning reasons, or they could have lower IQ and not necessarily have high support needs. So I think, just kind of shifting the paradigm around needs. And Zoe was always so instrumental in educating me over the course of 22 years, because similar to what Suzanne had said about Marco's assistance with technology is, Zoe and I would be brainstorming and talking about some of these challenges that Liam had, and she would say, "Well, don't we all have a version of that?" Now, I hesitate to do that because I think it minimizes the limitations and the ways that individuals who have high support needs can actually be embraced in the world. But I think part of shifting the paradigm of saying there's so much more commonality than there is difference in terms of some of the biases or unconscious bias even amongst the best of us, who would say, "Hey, I'm free thinking and I really embrace people with differences," but yet we do have unconscious biases, and so we would giggle and say, "Oh, everyone, it's a hip thing to have a weighted blanket now, where we used to have to pay a fortune to find it in a specialty place that with sensory integration. And now everybody wants a weighted blanket. If you're a millennial, you're come out of the womb with a weighted blanket as a baby, right?
It's your birthright.
It's your birthright." But, just in terms of advocacy, I would say that similar to any other discriminatory concept, I consider the definition to Suzanne's question earlier of advocacy is that I have certain privileges being who I am, and that I need to be an ally to people who don't have a voice or have the agency to show up in the world the way that some of us do. And that's my responsibility. And it's difficult to have that point of view, because once the veil is lifted and one realizes, so for example, and I'd be curious what Christine thinks about this. So in the course of 22 years, let's just say nonverbal individuals who tend to be really marginalized and underestimated in terms of who they are and what they're capable of. I just know too many individuals who are non-vocal or nonverbal, who are extraordinarily brilliant and have these amazing talents. And the minute that they're given the tool that allows them to have whatever the way that they can have a voice, it has changed the way I see the world, and I can no longer see the world the same way, to know that how people appear on the outside doesn't correlate to the potential and the gifts that they could aspire to. And so then what you all do so beautifully for a living is like, okay, how do we match that up, right? How do we, you know, if we had a magic wand, we would change the world to embrace those individuals fully, but we don't. So what we're trying to do is kind of, how do we meet the world? How do we change the world? Because I still think that's part of my responsibility, but also how do we change the way people can show up in the world? So I'll just finish by saying this in terms of you were talking about sort of natural supports and like how do we provide those kinds of things. And even when Liam was a baby, there was something, my husband, Liam's dad, is an actor. And that served us really well because there was a certain way that Eddie as an actor saw the world and kind of showed up as an artist, but also as someone who communicated in a certain way. And he set a rule, a family rule, when Liam was diagnosed, which was no one could talk about Liam in front of Liam without talking to Liam. And Liam was nonverbal at the time, and we didn't know if he would ever have language. But if anyone, a doctor, anyone, a waiter, anyone spoke about Liam in front of Liam, it was our responsibility, even when he was pre-verbal, to say, well, ask Liam. And so it started very young for us to advocate, and it became sort of a very, he wouldn't know it any different. He assumes he's a self-advocate. He's like, of course, you know, I have this incredible confidence, because why wouldn't I be speaking up for myself? Because he's always known that, thanks to his dad. I think the way I'm wired, I probably would have been a bit more protective and maybe wouldn't have seen that. And so I thank Eddie for that. But there are ways that through Liam's 24 years that we have continued to do that, which is not allow the world to treat him in a way as if he's invisible. And so that's how we show up as advocates.
Wow. You know, this is
That's
why
a great
I love
example.
Marianne Keller so much. I just want to say I've just always admired so much the way you and Eddie give each other space and respect. It's just beautiful. I do want you to know, Marianne, that Amy Jenneret is one of our participants, and we had a lot to do with Liam over the years. I just want to note that we do have a question coming from one of the participants about, I think it's probably for you, Christine. Have you used any type of assistive technology? And if so, what did you find useful? It seems like that kind of fits with the conversation right now.
I never used assistive technology. Sorry, my tongue's kind of, because my verbal language skills were really good. They thought I didn't really meet the criteria, even though they had me tested when I was in first grade. So, but I know,
how about with your students? Is there anything you've used with any of your students you thought was particularly helpful?
Well, they use like iPads, and they have like a speech app. Like, I don't know if you heard about LAMP, which is a AAC app, and it has various icons that you can make sentences with. So I have to know where each item is. Like, can you find cat, or can you find this word, like different foods, or different emotions, or different, like, or even different greetings, like thank you, sorry. I had to find the tool that helped me was like the word search finder. So that was like my best friend, but now I know how to use it. So it was a big learning curve for me this year of how to use an AAC app to help a nonverbal learner communicate.
Shay, how about when you were, gathering stories? Was there any insights you might share about gathering the stories from a variety of ways?
Yeah, one of the things in particular is that I had worked I'd worked for many, many years with parents, and I think everyone knows this, and I knew it intellectually, but to go into the family, go into the home and spend some time with the family, and even if you can spend it in sort of an open way, you're not necessarily coming in to treat the child. I mean, you maybe don't do this every time, but you would do a session where the session is about talking with the parents, asking them very open-ended questions they might not normally get asked. Just simple things like, how would you describe your child? And then also letting the child lead you through, just like we do in the clinic, but we have equipment that we, expecting that they would use. But even with the photography in the book, there are some pictures that look like the child is posing, but that was just the child's choice. There's a picture of a child under a bed, and I took the picture there. Or there's a story about one little kid that when he got home from school, his mother said he had to run around for a while. So he had just gotten home. So I went out with him with my camera, and he was running around and he was jumping off things and he was swinging and he was playing with a hula hoop. And I was just originally thinking, looking at all the sensory. Oh, look at he's going after all the sensory. And then I started noticing that before each thing, each new activity, he would pause and he would look at me like, are you watching me? And then he would do it. And I realized he was showing me things. And if I hadn't paused and watched and only thought about it in terms of the sensory pieces, I wouldn't have recognized his conversation with me. So there's a lot, if we can get those moments where we can be with the child, the family, the parents, the siblings, and just be there. It's a really nice way to get to know them better, and also to recognize the importance of helping the family and the child with self-advocacy.
It's something so magical, Shay, because I think the listening piece and the slowing down piece. So Liam started speaking when he was, I think, about 4. And he's got a beautiful vocabulary and just like an extraordinary spelling skill and so forth. But he would be considered sort of an unreliable communicator in that his expressive skills can vary depending on the environment and the circumstance and the level of stress in an environment. So there are a lot of things that he's created ways of communicating that are similar to what you just described, Shay, in terms of, I'm meant to be learning something here. I'm meant to be listening hard. So that listen loudly, as we call it, so that I can hear what is trying to be communicated. And we completely revised Liam's framework with, Liam lives independently with supported living services. So he lives in his own home and staff comes in 24/7 to support him in the areas where he needs support, but he's very independent in many ways as well. But the thing that we found was that he was having a lot of difficulty with individuals not slowing down enough to hear him. And because he's a high support individual, but he's a very bright man, they were used to individuals that had high support that were being very directed. And so it was creating a lot of friction. And what appeared to people to be behavioral issues on Liam's part, when in fact, he was doing everything he could to basically say, you're not listening to me. And so we had to go in and do an intervention, not with Liam, but with the staff, and change the framework of the training of the staff to say, he's telling you things. And so if you slow down and listen, and there may be unusual ways that he's telling you things. So one of the things that I'll just mention is that Liam's very fluent with allegorical speaking. So he will use language and concepts and terms which we would often call scripting, right? Like, oh, so-and-so is just scripting from a book he likes from Disney. What people don't often understand is there's actually a message in that. So I'm very familiar with this passage in this movie or this video or on YouTube or in a book, but it holds meaning to me. And so when I recite that, I'm actually telling you something very important. Now, the problem with that is we can't train the world on every individual's allegorical language and concepts, right? But what we've come to do with we actually have a glossary. And so Liam's staff was trained in the glossary of when Liam's reciting James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, and he's saying, "You're tearing me apart," which is when James Dean would yell at his parents. Liam is telling you you're not listening to him, because that's what James Dean was telling his parents in that scene. And so the listening loudly, I think we would find that there's a rich amount of communication going on when we put ourselves in the shoes of the communicator.
Yeah. Can I just, so I was hearing Shay and Marianne, I had the privilege to work with Liam when I was at PTN. And that was an amazing experience. And it's so amazing because you can really tell, and I've been working with kids since then, and you really can tell a difference on kids. And I'm not saying this is a direct proportion, but we can tell a difference when parents understand their kids, you know, like you and Eddie do understand Liam. And sometimes I feel like we do need to advocate for these children in their families, because sometimes families are so, you know, focused on the problems, or they just give it a meaning that it's like depreciative of some things that the children do, like, you know, stereotypic movements or repetitive behaviors, or, you know, interests that are quite off what we would expect. And I remember this kid that, you know, he was 4 years old, and he had this amazing interest in history and museums, and he could name all the museums and all, you know, in the world, and all the painters and artists. It was amazing. And parents were trying to take them out of him because it wouldn't fit what other kids with 4 and 5 years old do. And we thank God we could change their view to see, you know, this is actually a strength. This could be something that it could be a strength for all his life. So do you have any experience with this, like helping families to see kids differently and advocate with, you know, within families, not only in the community, schools, or whatever? What are your thoughts on this?
So I'm going to answer that, but I also have a question for Christine tied to that. So I'll just say this, that I'm lucky enough, I have a number of families in our community that I'm really close with. And fortunately, the parents tend to give me a lot of leeway, because what I mean by that is sometimes the parents are the ones who, I think it's commonly known in the adult world, right? It's like, what's the biggest barrier to individuals going into adulthood? And the answer is the parents. So, and I could say that as a parent, so, right? So I'm allowed to say that. And I think it's because there's some paradigm that if someone has a disability, our job is to fix them. And when we hit the point in our family experience, when we realized that there was nothing broken with Liam, and what our job was to enter into a way of attunement so that we could understand one another. And so what happens sometimes is I'll actually see a self-advocate attempting to communicate or be heard or be seen. And I'll see a family member shut that person down, and it kind of kills a piece of me, because I think this must happen all the time. And unfortunately, I'm too old, and I don't have a filter, and I don't have a lot of and this is true. If you know me, you know this is true.
You're in good company.
And so a lot of times I'll say to parents, and fortunately they many of them, we have love for one another, so they'll indulge me, and I'll say, excuse me, I think so-and-so is trying to tell us something. And then I'll have the opportunity to engage in a very rich, sometimes nonverbal conversation with that individual in the hopes that that is demonstrating some kind of possibility or potential there. And it's led, to be honest with you, it's led us to launch an adult program that we have, which is a whole other conversation, which is building a framework on the concept of self-determination and self-advocacy and putting the individual at the core of the, you know, the directive and all of that stuff. But the answer is yes. But the other piece, I would love to ask Christine if she would be willing to talk about the concept that you brought, which is preferred interests, and how sometimes we misunderstand the developmental nature of what a preferred interest is and what that represents to an individual. And Christine and I share a love of Hello Kitty, and so I know that's something that that she has had. And Christine, would you share on that about having a preferred interest and what maybe how that was discouraged and what that meant for you?
Yeah, because a lot of the times there's two paradigms that go with that. Like some people say, well, if they like Barney or if they like Peppa Pig, then people are going to treat them like they're little kids. So I want to have them have age-appropriate interests, like, you know, watching reality TV shows or watching football or any of the other stuff that, you know, same age peers would want them, because we want that person to see the individual with autism or developmental disability as an adult or a teenager. And then there's the other part where a lot of parents get concerned that they want their kids to make friends, and they feel like, you know, someone being interested in cartoons, like, and toys and stuff, and carrying a stuffed animal might be a barrier for them to make friends. Parents, through no fault of their own, will try to encourage their kid to, you know, like what their peers are like. So they'll have like an avenue of connection. But the problem is you're taking away that person's sense of agency to choose what they like to do. Ironically, even though you're saying, oh, I want people will treat them like an adult if they like adult things, but you're doing the opposite because you're telling them what to like.
What is the result of that? Like if you were in a situation where you weren't allowed to have that interest or express that publicly, what would the result of that be?
Probably be like anxiety, low self-esteem, questioning, saying, should I really like this kind of stuff? Constantly seeking reassurance.
Yeah. I think I would feel the same way, you know. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's really important for us to be thinking about. I think you know, a lot of occupational therapists struggle with this when we try to blend with some of the behavioral programs, because just naturally, I think we are trained to build on interests, to respect interests and to build on them, and to look for the meaning, like Marianne, you're talking about in some of the scripting. You know, I think we can see the meaning in that communication. It's sometimes a challenge then to figure out how to blend that with some of the approaches that don't always do that.
Yeah, and I think, Christine, you said it well, which is there's a lot of really well-intentioned approaches or actions that we all take, but we have to sometimes examine, like, who does that really serve, right? And so I think a lot of times what I've heard from self-advocates is that that they have felt that sometimes people close to them have felt embarrassed that they have had those preferences, or that they showed up that way, as opposed to supporting them and saying, yeah, you know, this my loved one enjoys this, because the truth is we all have those secret things that we enjoy that maybe, that if people knew that we did them or whatever, that we would feel, a little shy about it. But the reality is that that's really natural.
Well, and even Christine's example, I mean, it's just kind of slaps you in the face, that what, like Hello Kitty's not okay, but reality TV is acceptable. I mean, just hearing you say that, it's kind of sobering, what the culture drives in so many ways. Yeah.
But again, I have friends that love Hello Kitty and Pokemon. The Pokemon Go fever that we had like a couple years ago, and we have people like they are typically developing people, and nobody questions that. Sometimes I think I read this thing the other day that people sometimes they have the donut and they just focus on the whole. It's just like, and sometimes because we have a label or a kid or a teen or a person with a disability, it seems like everything they do can be put in this focus of like not adequate or a problem somehow. But in other people, and I have two brothers, they are like 22 years old and they spend the day playing video games, and they shouldn't be working or they should do other stuff than just playing video games, but it's just an interest they do and they have right now, and somehow it helps in some ways of their life. So I think it's the same for every other people with or without disability, right?
Yeah, and what I have found is that some of those situations that might happen in public, like you're saying, Christine, like how do we show up in public, right? And I think for me, part of advocating is to send a message. In my experience, people are kind, but they're nervous to be around things that they don't understand. And so it makes them shy, and therefore it makes them stand away, right? So I'll use the example, like if we go to a restaurant, when restaurants were a thing, so passé now. But when we would go to a restaurant
in the olden days,
in the old days,
yeah.
Yes, but we would go to a restaurant, and the server would turn to us and say, what would he like to eat, instead of talking to Liam. And so what I would do is I would just turn to Liam and say, I would model to make the person not feel bad about themselves, but to feel empowered, right? So I would turn and I'd say, Lee, what do you think you want? And then I would wait, keep my eyes on him, because it takes him a while to answer. And so the message I'm sending is he will answer, but it might take a little while. Or sometimes I might say, we're going to take a little bit, but just stay with us if you're not in a hurry. And people are very kind, but to advocate is to kind of create that bridge of safeness. So he doesn't feel embarrassed. He doesn't feel like he's pressured or whatever. And he'll give the order. And usually I'll just smile and watch, because what that's saying is like, everything's okay. Like I'm sending a message to the person who may not know a person like Liam, that this is just happening. And what happened was, when my mom was alive, she lived with us before she passed away, and she was elderly and she had illnesses. And people didn't hesitate to be patient and wait for her, because it was expected that an elderly person would take a long time to order, then change their mind, and then be complicated and do all these things, right? But I realized, similar to what Zoe had said to me for 20-something years, we all do it, right? So why shouldn't Liam be afforded the same patience as my elderly mom? But my advocacy is to send the message and to help kind of create that bridge so that it becomes safe for Liam, but it also becomes safe for this person to not be like, this is weird, what do I do? How do I feel? It's just like, it's okay, we'll get there.
You know, Marianne, one of the questions I had for you was how you have been able to be such a strong advocate without being confrontational. And I think actually you've just answered that really eloquently with that example, you know, because one of the things when we had this topic of advocacy, when I look back and I think about advocates in the school system, and I think, and just talking to therapists, my impression is that occupational therapists by nature are a little bit, you know, they kind of step back. They're not necessarily right out there. And so I think there's often a little bit of hesitancy about engaging in advocacy. So that's such a great strategy. I don't know if you have more to add about that, but that idea that it can be so conflictual.
So I'll tell you something very revealing, which is my husband and I were wise enough when Liam was young. Believe it or not, we had strains in our marriage from having a very complicated family life. But I think strains in the marriage are just a general thing for anybody. So we were smart enough to get couples counseling. And one of the things that we happened to mention in counseling was how Liam was having these very loud experiences in our home. And we lived in an apartment building, and we were very worried about the neighbors' reaction to that. And our therapist listened to it, and he said, he has a right to be on the planet too.
Nice.
And it was a paradigm shift for me, because I thought, as long as Liam's not harming anyone, now being loud might keep people up or whatever, and then that's disrespectful and we have to deal with that, right? But if he's being loud during a time that other people are being loud too, he's just being loud like everybody else. But sometimes we're more embarrassed by someone with a disability doing something, and we feel like we don't have as much of a right to take up space. And so it changed the way I considered his right to take up space. And as long as someone wasn't being hurt, and as long as he was understanding a sense of respect for other people, he had a right to take up space the way that he needed to do that.
Beautiful.
So great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Suzanne's quiet because she's going to cry.
Well, I'm listening because I love all of this. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of modeling the self-advocacy, and I love this term, a sense of agency. I think that term might be difficult to translate into multiple languages, but that sense of acceptance and being with others with an ease of accepting who they are is so critical, you know. So yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts and feelings. I have a brother who's an adult with special needs. We love him dearly. He's complicated sometimes, but we love him to bits. But the other person that's coming to mind in a couple weeks, we've invited friends of mine, Karen Claudis and her daughter Emma, who are wonderful. And Emma's nonverbal with autism, but she's a college student, amazing. She has to type. So I guess I want everybody to know if there's questions for her. And I hope Christine and Marianne, you could join, join and watch the webinar when Emma's here. But she will need some time if you have questions. We're not going to be able to do it on the fly. She'll need a little bit of time, but I think you'll enjoy meeting our friends in a couple weeks.
Yeah, so we're just about out of time, aren't we? Christine, how is your book doing? Is it selling, and have you had any chance to share information about it?
I shared information about my book to a couple of people, and everybody, like even the neighbors, and they say that they really enjoyed it. Like it really showed what we all went through in the journey.
Yeah.
Because it talks about, the transition from school age services to adulthood and how it's like you fall off this cliff because it was not like a territory that was explored
That's right.
before, like people like Liam and me grew up, and it's like we all had to pave and be the guinea pigs, even though it's not something that we signed up for. And then I sometimes get frustrated, like why wasn't this like discovered before me? Like how come I have to be this trailblazer?
Mhm.
Well, you're a pioneer.
Well, we've shared information about your book and about Shay's book. And actually, Marco reminded us that Marianne has a book too. So we have all the authors tonight.
Great.
Mhm. And who do we have next week? Is that when Emma's coming, Suzanne, or who's next
Emma's
week?
in 2 weeks. Next week, and actually the next 2 weeks, just everybody be aware, we're going to meet at 10 in the morning. Because next,
No
well,
wine.
we're
good.
suggesting mimosas with or without orange
you know,
juice.
you know what's great? I still can drink wine.
Yeah, right.
That's amazing.
There will be people. Yeah.
Right. So next week we have friends, and we've tried to have a representative. I know they can't represent their whole world, but someone from South Africa, South America, North America, and Europe. And we will talk about daily routines and habits that are healthy habits and routines. And they may be different around the world. So we'll have an international group. So we have to start at 10 because otherwise it's in the middle of the night. So yeah, join us next week. And we will also, the following week, we have our colleagues from the United Kingdom, from England, who routinely work with adults. And that's where Karen and Emma are going to join them. Karen's Kath Smith and Roz Irwin are joining.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
So it's a fun. We've got a lineup. We'll let you know.
Well, thank you all so
Yeah.
much, Marianne, Christine, Shay. It's
Thank you.
such a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you for the
Very
honor.
nice.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Amy's saying hello. And so we always say, stay connected, stay positive, and I always forget
Stay
one of them.
safe.
Stay safe.
Now it stays safe. Yes.
Keep safe.
Yeah. Well,
Cheers, everyone.
cheers
Okay,
and good
cheers.
night.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Marco.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, you guys.